this leadership, this strategic leadership. The key thing we have to do is when we go through this is we have to tie it together with the other factors within the organization. We have to make sure we're tying in our human capital supply chain goals to the business strategy in terms of revenue growth and cost management. Now, if you look at that human capital supply chain, and I think it was with the one presentation about manpower, what was the number one toughest position to fill? Sales. We can figure out how to make that whole sales supply chain work smoother in terms of having the pools of talent out there. We can pull on them and make that whole piece go faster. We can directly impact revenue. If we can go through that whole process in terms of how we work with our strategic staffing suppliers, and we can get more commonality and more cost control, we can directly impact cost management. In terms of business performance, one of the problems is that from an HR perspective, we typically think in annual time frames. You put a budget together, you start to hire to that budget, and then you have to plan a new one and get ready for the next year. That's too long. Manufacturing systems don't take that long time. I mean, think about it. Manufacturing distributions systems, they're changing hourly, daily. And I think the best way for you to think about it is, okay, right now I do things on an annual basis. I do things based on what the budget tells me to do. So the first step is to say, okay, let's think about this quarterly. Every quarter, we're going to rethink our human capital needs based on where the business is at that point in time. Then from a quarterly point of view, we go to monthly. From monthly, we go to weekly. I don't think we have to go to daily. I think we're fine. Within your organization, there are business things that are changing on a weekly basis. And you need to be able to see how that flows all through your workforce planning. The next speaker after me is going to talk about workforce planning and how strategic that is. And what we're trying to do is give you a framework. Give you a framework so that HR can take to the corporation something that's more strategic than you've ever done before, because now you're tying it all together. Because you can affect strategy, you can affect performance. You can develop workforce plans that are directly connected in with what the financial systems are telling you and what the operational systems are. Those are your two feeder systems. The operational and sales systems have to tell you what to get ready for. The financial systems have to tell you what cost constraints do you have. But those two systems have to flow together into your workforce plan. And in reality, we just don't do that well. Our workforce plan is an annual budget. That just won't cut it anymore. Again, you have to go from annual, quarterly, and monthly to weekly. And the other thing that kind of throws a wrench into the whole thing is social networking. And as we've seen, the social networking capabilities are making things happen within minutes. So again, on one side you have social networking where you can communicate with your entire talent pool within minutes with a single tweet. But yet, you work with an annual budget. Do you see that it doesn't connect anymore? You have to develop your strategic suppliers. Now, a lot of my work has been with staffing suppliers over the years. And many of them don't feel very strategic. They feel that it's a push-down environment where the corporation just push down the bill rate because it's all about cost. And most staffing suppliers are scared to death right now because as vendor management systems become more and more prevalent, they feel they've been separated from their buyers. In many cases, they're not allowed to talk to hiring managers anymore. They have to talk to procurement. So what you have to do is develop those relationships with those suppliers. Think about manufacturing. If you go to any auto manufacturing plant right now, and if you're in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, and you order a red Ford Focus, as soon as you put that order in the system, what happens? It flows right through the manufacturing system, flows right down to those suppliers. And they know within minutes what they have to do to provide the parts and provide that infrastructure to help Ford build that focus. That's the environment we need as well. We need to have that type of connection with our suppliers, whether they be executive search firms, temporary staffing firms, it doesn't matter. If they're a supplier of yours, you have to have a direct relationship with them. And again, if you go back to some of the concepts within Six Sigma and within just-in-time manufacturing, it basically tells you in many cases you have to narrow down your supplier base. You have to focus on those suppliers that are strategic with you, and you develop your plans together, and then you connect your systems together. You need to plan that talent acquisition. When we talk about sourcing skills, this is one of the problems with current HRIS systems right now, is you can see your employees, you can see what their job titles were, you can see where they worked, you can see what classes they took. You really don't have a good idea of what skills they have. So you have to go back in your HRIS systems and say, okay, how do we make them more skill-oriented? If you look over on the temporary staffing industry, all they worry about is skills. Because when you place an order with them, you're placing an order for a specific skill set. You may also say, okay, well, somebody with that skill that has 2 to 3 years experience. You really don't care a lot about what all they did in the past. So one thing we have to look there is how do we source skills, not just jobs, just not education, just not titles. And again, being more proactive, not just reactive. Most of us in our jobs, especially as your corporations ramp back up, there's going to be requisitions, personnel requisitions flying all over the place. And you're going to be trying to keep up with that. Now's the time to be proactive on putting those skill pools and those talent pools in place. Assessing the talent, onboarding, the payment, and then again, we have to come back and reanalyze what happened in that whole supply chain. How well did it work? What do we do different? And ideally, you want to get this process down to a weekly basis. I see some people saying, oh my God, I can't do it. I can't do it. I feel like I can handle this on an annual basis. How am I supposed to think on a weekly basis? I can't do it. You have to. Because it was the same thing that was facing manufacturing in the 1980s. They had a choice to make. Either they redefined how manufacturing flowed, and they brought in world-class manufacturing techniques and just-in-time and Kanban systems and all these other things, or they were going to be out of business. Some companies did it well. Some didn't, and they're not here anymore. So that's your choice, because as we move forward, we know that our businesses are becoming more and more talent-oriented. We have to figure out how to put new processes in place. You have, and this is your responsibility, you have to start to break down the barriers between HR, procurement, your suppliers, and your senior leadership. And what you have to do is bring them together in our common cause. Use the human capital supply chain mantra, if you want to call it. That can be your common cause. You need to build on existing business functions, even if they're still disjointed. Because what we've found is it always works better. Rather than trying to blow up everything and build it all from scratch, take the pieces that are working. Don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. But use those pieces. So basically, think of this as a renovation. We're not telling you to demolish your systems. We're saying it's time to renovate. And what you have to do with that renovation is keep the things that are working and get rid of the things that aren't. And then start to build it up around this human capital supply chain concept. One of the key things that's so important with any supply chain environment is to connect all the pieces, connect all the business processes. You can't let any of it kind of float around outside the supply chain. Because as soon as you have a process that floats outside the supply chain, it becomes a bottleneck. Every time it becomes one of the worst bottlenecks. Because what happens is, if you develop this manual interface, we don't know how to connect them, so we're just going to re-input everything. It's a bottleneck. And also, we have to embrace the benefits of the contingent workforce. We've heard kind of some rumblings about it here today. Now, with our company, we have 20% of our workforce is contingent. That's contractors and temporaries. If you look at the U.S. market, on average, only about 2% of your workforce is contingent.